Black people throughout our history have fought in American wars for generations in order to uphold the ideals of justice and freedom. Unfortunately, most of the time they did not receive themselves the justice or freedom that they gave their blood, sweat, and lives for. This episode is to pay homage to those men and women who not only fought for this country on the battlefield, but fought for the improvement of this country's approach to treating people of color so that they would not remain second-class citizens in their own home.
Welcome to Black Lives Chatter,
where we explore Black history and identity,
one chat at a time. This episode is dedicated to Corporal Melvin Rogers Scott Jr., who was one of the first African Americans to join the Marine Corps and a recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was also the first African American man to be hired as a school teacher by the Vineland, New Jersey Board of Education. Mr. Scott, we thank you for your service.
So in this episode, we're going to be talking a lot about Black soldiers who participated in the major conflicts of American history. So we're going to be talking about the Revolutionary War. We're going to be talking about the Civil War. We're going to talk about World War I and World War II, among others. And it's going to be a lot of information, to be honest with you. It's going to be a lot of history. And if you want, you can skip ahead to the interviews that we're doing later on in this episode, but you will be missing a lot of information. And though we here at BLC do not judge, we will judge you for missing out on important information.
The time codes will be in the description.
Yes, they will. They'll be in the description. And Victor, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm excited. I'm very excited.
I can't wait to dive into this. We actually, to kind of break the magic a little bit, we just interviewed your boy, Mr. P.
Yes. We just got done interviewing Mr. Pierre. Mm-hmm. His interview is going to be later on in the episode, like I said. So let's actually talk about the American Revolution. I was able to find some information on Black soldiers who participated in the Revolutionary War in an article written by historian Edward Ayers. As the bells of independence and liberty rang louder and louder through America in the 1770s, Black slaves began to take notice and believed that freedom for America would mean freedom for them too. They started joining the fight wherever they could, on the American side and the British side, if they thought doing so would earn them their freedom.
Man, that's tough. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, that's okay.
Man, all throughout these different wars, you see the promise of freedom or financial gain. Mm-hmm. So it's always this promise: hey, like if you just do this, if you fight for us, you'll get all these winnings, you'll earn so much stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of sad how what's the word? It's like a carrot on a stick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
something you should already have. Mm-hmm. But they want to sell it to you.
Yeah, and it's a common theme that you'll see as we talk about the history of American wars and the Black soldiers who fought in them. The theme of Black soldiers seeing in war conflict an opportunity to rise above their secondhand status in America and prove that they're worthy of equal status and civil rights. In 1775, up to 15 Black soldiers fought on the American side in the battles of Lexington and Bunker Hill. In fact, 2 Black soldiers, Salem Poor and Peter Salem, were recognized for their bravery during those battles. Over 800 runaway slaves joined the cause of British Royal Governor Lord Dunmore. So let me tell you a little bit about Lord Dunmore.
Yeah.
Like I just said, he was a British Royal Governor. He was stationed in Virginia. And what he did is he would promise runaway slaves their freedom if they fought for him against the American rebels.
Mm-hmm. Could he actually grant their freedom?
Well, by the end of the Revolutionary War, Lord Dunmore had been defeated soundly and forced to leave Virginia, so no. And besides that, the Declaration of Independence, did not pave any way for freedom for slaves. So by the end of the Revolutionary War, it became clear to African American slaves that the notions of freedom and liberty that had stirred up the entire nation had not been intended for them. By 1777, laws were being enacted that allowed slave owners to sell their slaves to the Continental Army or use their slaves as substitutes if their sons were drafted and they didn't want to send them off to fight.
Wow.
Rhode Island's Black Battalion, established in 1778, was made up of such slaves. And they fought at Yorktown, where they were said to be the most neatly dressed, the best under arms, and the most precise in their maneuvers. So Black excellence has a long history, doesn't it, Victor?
Yeah, that's so cool to hear that. I mean, you can hear about their discipline and just looking nice and really paying respect to the flag that they're serving under in the fight. All right, Brother Rick, I want to go into the Civil War. I want to tell you 2 stories about our people during that time.
Okay.
But first, I wanted to get into our general mentality before the Civil War and during. I want to talk about Black pride. Now, you're a Black man, Ricky.
Yes.
You are a proud man.
Yes, indeed.
So you're a proud Black man, which is great. And at this point in our history, the conversation was about giving the Black man rights and freedoms. Essentially, what can we give you, we being the white man at the time, what can we give you to make you proud? What can we give you to kind of help you along? And essentially, they would say that they had the power to deem you a human being. Even allies and abolitionists still had the view of superiority, even Abraham Lincoln.
Falk was going on about how he believed in giving blacks the right to go to school, giving them the right to vote, giving them the right to go into anything they qualified for. And then he said he experienced an epiphany.
I was sitting out on a wagon tongue with this old black man and was telling him what a different kind of white man I was. I remember him looking at me very sadly and kind of sweetly and condescending and said, you still got the disease, honey. I know you think you're cured, but you're not cured. You can't give me the right to be a human being. I'm born with that right. Now, you can keep me from having that. If you've got all the policemen and all the jobs on your side, you can deprive me of it. But you can't give it to me, because I was born with it just like you was. My God, it had a profound effect on me. I was furious with him. But the more I reflected on it, the more profoundly it affected me. And I realized this was where it really was.
We just watched a video where a white dude was interviewing an old black slave, former slave, and the white guy was like, now, I'm a different type of white guy. I am, I'm a friend, I'm an ally, all that stuff. And the black dude was like, you still have that disease. You can't give me that right to be a human. I'm born with it. Right? There was pride always there. So they already acknowledged their own humanity. So, of course, they fought given the chance. What did you think about the video?
Well, I think that I appreciate that the words of the gentleman in the video, right? The efforts of abolitionists and Abraham Lincoln, all of these things were done in the spirit of restoring the status of African Americans as I wouldn't say equals, but I guess members of society that weren't animals or slaves. Yeah. And so there was a spirit of trying to help the black person at that time. But at the same time, we have to understand that there are things that we're born with that you can't give to us. The slaves were born with intrinsic dignity. They were born with intrinsic worth that no white person of power, not even Abraham Lincoln, could give to them. And, again, I appreciate what was being done, the help that was being provided, but there were certain things that they couldn't give.
Yeah, you can't give someone their humanity, right? You can't, they're born with that.
Exactly.
But the issue comes in from them thinking they are on a higher plane. And they were like, what can we help you to move your plane up to ours? But not quite on level, but a little bit under. And then that was the issue where you weren't seeing us as equal, or you weren't seeing black slaves as equal. You were seeing them as, like you said, animals are inferior beings. Now, let's talk about fighting for the North and how that happened before we get into fighting for the South and everything. So Congress made it legal for black slaves to fight, right? Free black men were finally permitted to enlist late in 1862. Following the passage of the Second Confiscation and Militia Act. which freed slaves who had masters in the Confederate Army. So essentially, let's say there was a battle, right, and the North beat the South. And the North kind of took prisoners, and black prisoners were taken as contraband, right? So Congress had to pass an act saying this contraband, they can fight, which is kind of messed up, viewing black people as idols, right? Like,
yeah, spoils of war.
Spoils of war, as you said. And of course, when it happened, no equal pay. Even when we're fighting, we get less money.
Of course.
But African American soldiers comprised about 10% of the Union Army. Freed blacks, including Harriet Tubman, were also spies, scouts, and agents. Members of this group were called Black Dispatches. Tubman even famously led a raid outside Beaufort, South Carolina, in 1863. The value of the Black Dispatches was recognized by all in the Union, and even by the Confederacy. General Robert E. Lee said, "The chief source of information to the enemy is through our Negroes." So even then, you could see that black people were recognized for their worth at the time, but they still weren't giving blacks the proper value, proper treatment. It was just a messed up situation.
It's also really cool to see, too, that the African Americans were so vital to the fall of the South.
Which is
you
great.
Know what I mean? They actually played a active and vital part to dismantling the Confederacy. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Okay, one of the first stories I wanted to tell you was about the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. The 54th Regiment was a volunteer Union regiment. Its members became known for their bravery and fierce fighting against Confederate forces. It was the second all-black Union regiment to fight in the war after the first Kansas-colored volunteer infantry. It was led by a white dude named Robert Shaw, who was a child of abolitionists. So on July 18th, 1863, the 54th Massachusetts prepared to storm Fort Wagner, which guarded the port of Charleston, and at dusk, Shaw gathered 600 of his men on a narrow strip of sand just outside the fort and got them ready for action. And he said to them, "I want you to prove yourselves," he said. "The eyes of thousands will look on what you do tonight." So essentially, there was pressure on black people to kind of prove themselves at that point, like I said earlier. But it was kind of cool because they did, right? The 54th lost. They lost the fight, but they did enough damage to pave the way for future regiments to take the fort. So essentially, they were successful. They were definitely pivotal in that fight, right? Shaw died during the fight, unfortunately, and the South buried him with his men to embarrass him and to stop other black regiments. But Shaw's parents replied that there could be no holier place to be buried than surrounded by brave and devoted soldiers.
It's a beautiful thing for them to say.
Yeah, definitely means a lot. Next, I wanted to tell you about Gordon. Now, Gordon was a black slave who escaped his slavers, and he headed north for a week until he stumbled upon a Union camp. And after all that running, he wanted to fight. The first thing he wanted to do was fight. So, before that, he got a medical check, and they took pictures of his back, which was torn apart. And the image essentially was the shot heard around the world for abolition, right? Because you've seen the image. It's the image of the black slave with the whips with the marks on his back.
Uh-huh.
And it shed light on the abuses of slavery. And still, after that, all he wanted to do was fight. That's all he wanted to do. So Gordon joined the Union Army as a guide for 3 months after the Emancipation Proclamation allowed for the enrollment of free slaves into the military forces, right? Because he wasn't confiscated, right? He ran away. It also shed light in black people being pivotal, like we said earlier, pivotal in the fight against the South. On one expedition, he was taken prisoner by the Confederates. They tied him up, beat him, and left him for dead. He survived and once more escaped to the Union lines. I couldn't imagine, escaping twice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was meant to be great.
Yeah, man. And again, that whole story sparked an uproar within abolitionists due to how graphic the image was. That image is hard to look at.
So I just have one question about the Civil War, Brother Vic.
Yeah, what's that?
Did any black soldiers actually fight for the Confederacy?
So black people actually did fight for the Confederacy, oddly enough. So blacks served, although most were impressed as a slave labor force. Others were brought along by their masters to tend to the master's need in camp. In some cases, these servants were entrusted with a master's personal belongings and had to return them to his estate if he was killed. Even after death, slaves still had to work for their masters. They were still legally obligated to do that. The Confederacy's early military successes depended significantly on slavery. In fact, slaves worked so that way their masters could fight.
So would you say that slaves kind of filled in the holes that were left by their masters as they went off to fight, and they kind of allowed the Southern infrastructure and economy to continue?
Yeah, not only that, but they worked at the camps, right? They were the craftsmen, they would clean, they cooked, they built the camp. So without slaves, the South never stood a chance. But there are reports of a few servants who actually took their master's place on the firing line and were adopted by the regiment. Records also show that men served as color bearers in militia units. Tens of thousands may have served, willingly or otherwise, right? So including, working for the camps, working in the camps. But at the midpoint of the war in 1863, when more Confederate soldiers were needed, state militias of freed black men were offered to the Confederate war, but the office refused. Even though there were black men capable of fighting that were part of a militia unit, the Confederates were like, nah, we're not going to give you guys your own units, which is crazy.
It is.
You can work for your country, you can bleed for your country, but you can't die for your country. It's crazy. So as the war continued, the South lost at the end of the day.
Of course.
So they were like, you know what? We'll take you. And on March 13th, 1865, legislation was finally passed that would free black slaves if they enlisted in the Confederate Army. Although they must have consent from the masters. And what master's giving them consent, right? It's like a fake offer. But only a handful of black soldiers enlisted like this, probably less than 50. And then when the war ended, they were in training. So mainly, they didn't get a chance to fight through that enlistment process.
So let's talk about Buffalo Soldiers and the Indian Wars.
All right.
After the Civil War, Congress passed the Army Organization Act of 1866. Out of this came the first federally recognized black battalion made up of 6 cavalry and infantry regiments who fought in the Indian Wars. Why were they called the Buffalo Soldiers? Well, some historians theorize that Native Americans who encountered the all-black 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments on the western frontier thought of their dark and curly hair to be like the fur of the buffalo. Others say that African Americans' powerful and relentless fighting style reminded Native Americans of the buffalo, which earned their reverence and respect.
I like that explanation better.
Me too. Either way, the nickname spread. The Buffalo Soldiers of the 9th and 10th regiments were not only known for serving as soldiers, but they were also instrumental in the protection of national parks such as Yosemite and Sequoia, where they fought wildfires, stopped poachers, and served as park rangers. Speaking of the 10th Regiment, General John J. Pershing was a white man who led the 10th Regiment, an all-black regiment, from 1895 to 1897. The respect he gained for black men from leading them and fighting with them earned him the name N-Word Jack. Now let's be clear.
It's not Neighbor Jack.
No, it wasn't Neighbor Jack, and it wasn't meant to be a compliment. This was definitely an insult. Despite this, Pershing didn't exactly become an ally for African Americans. He said this to French soldiers during World War I. We must prevent intimacy between French officers and black officers. We must not eat with them, must not shake hands, or seek to talk or meet with them outside of the requirements of military service. Recognize their good qualities and their services, but only in moderate terms. Sounds like a great guy, huh?
Yeah, what in the world? So
yeah, he fought with African Americans, and he gained respect for African Americans, but he still didn't see them as equals in the end.
That's crazy how he spent so much time with black people and didn't change his mind at all.
I agree.
So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware.
After the Indian Wars came World War I. And as World War I loomed, African Americans saw an opportunity to rise above their status as second-class citizens in America through military service, though by and large blacks were being turned away from the military at the time.
Yep.
The Selective Service Act of 1917, which required all male Americans 21 to 31 years of age to register for the draft, helped to turn the tide, and soon black men were flocking to the war effort to prove their patriotism and worth as American citizens. When it came to World War I drafts, racism and discrimination reared its ugly head as measures were taken to ensure that black men were drafted.
Wait, were drafted?
Were drafted. In some cases, African Americans with physical shortcomings that should have been disqualified from military service were drafted and sent to war, while white men with the same conditions were exempted from the draft.
That's crazy.
Yep. In the South, post office employees would often hide the registration cards of black men who were eligible to join the military because they knew that if the black men didn't turn in their registration cards, they would be arrested for draft dodging. Black farm owners and fathers would be drafted ahead of single white farmhands. Representing only 10% of America's population at the time, blacks made up 13% of American soldiers in World War I. With limited opportunities in the Marines, the Navy, and the Coast Guard, black soldiers were mainly employed in the Army, where they served in the cavalry, infantry, as medics, engineers, signalers, artillerymen, chaplains, surveyors, drivers, chemists, and intelligence officers. There was progress as World War I gave rise to the first commissioned black officers, though the officer training camps were segregated.
Of course.
Yep. In October 1917, 639 black men became captains, first lieutenants, and second lieutenants, with that number soon rising to 1,353. Higher positions didn't exactly mean equal treatment for black soldiers, who faced hostility from white soldiers who refused to salute them or allow them into their quarters and clubs. Despite the treatment they received from their white comrades, the 92nd and 93rd primarily black army divisions were instrumental in the defeat of the Germans, who retreated from the war in 1918. World War II was actually kind of a turning point for black soldiers because of the desegregation of the military, which resulted in more black and white soldiers fighting alongside each other in the trenches. We actually found this really great video from the History Channel that we're going to play a little bit of the audio for you right now.
Mm-hmm.
The Army played a significant role because in many ways the Army was the first place that blacks and whites began to have to stand together and represent the same idea. Even though they were in segregated barracks, they were fighting for the same cause. And somewhere along the line where your lives are on the line together, some of the social barriers began to come down.
And during the 1960s, that shared experience during World War II was a very powerful motivation force for the people marching in the streets. That's not to say that it was easy. If you look at the people who were attacked by police dogs and hosed down in the street and beaten and killed during this time, it was a painful and torturous period in American history. But at the same time, probably came about sooner than it would have because of World War II.
This video actually reminds me of the W.E.B. Du Bois quote of 1919, when he said, "We return from fighting, we return fighting."
Despite the gains of the abolition of slavery and the 3 Reconstruction Amendments to the Constitution, Jim Crow segregation had pervaded every aspect of American society since the 1890s. And the military was no exception. When black men volunteered for duty or were drafted following the Japanese sneak attack, they were relegated to segregated divisions and combat support roles such as cook, quartermaster, and grave digging duty. The military was as segregated as the Deep South. Again, through adversity, there is change. During the war, stories of black excellence helped to pave the way towards equality. So everything that happened overseas played a role on the things back home, like the Tuskegee Airmen, Doris Miller, and black regiments that fought just as hard as the white ones. It showed our pride.
Speaking of Doris Miller, let's talk about his story for a little bit, because it really is an awesome story.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it.
On January 20th, 2020, the newest Navy aircraft carrier was named after Doris Miller. It's called the USS Doris Miller. Doris Miller is actually the first African American to win the Navy Cross honor, and the aircraft carrier that was named after him is the first one to be named after a black man. And it's the second ship named after Miller.
2 ships?
Yeah. So why has Miller received so much recognition? Well, you may know about Miller already if you've ever watched the Pearl Harbor movie of 2001. And if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Have you watched it, Brother Vic?
No, I haven't seen it actually, but I might go watch it now.
You really should, man. In the movie, Doris Miller is portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr. When the attack on Pearl Harbor began, Doris Miller was aboard the USS West Virginia, and he was doing his job collecting laundry. After rushing to carry wounded soldiers to safety, Miller manned a .50 caliber anti-aircraft machine gun. At this point in 1941, remember, black men in the Navy were not allowed to man a gun and they weren't taught how to do so. Despite that, Doris Miller used the gun to defend the USS West Virginia, firing on Japanese fighter planes until he ran out of ammo and he was ordered to abandon ship. Miller later attributed his ability to use the gun to just having watched other people use it before. And he said it wasn't hard. I just pulled the trigger and she worked fine. It's remarkable, man.
That's a pretty awesome quote. Man, what a hero. Now, I have another story for you about the 452nd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion. So, the battalion fought in nearly every major Allied land campaign in the European theater of operations, including Normandy, northern France, Rhineland, and Central Europe. The battalion landed in Normandy on June 23rd, 1944. And they also participated in the Battle of the Bulge and was part of General Patton's famous rescue of the besieged town of Bastogne. In its participation in the defense of a bridge crossing of the Rhine River near Oppenheim on March 22nd, 1944, the battalion shot down many attacking German planes, and during one 24-hour period, they destroyed 10 of them.
Let's talk about the famous Vietnam War, or as many would think of it, the infamous Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
For many African American soldiers, the Vietnam War was not just a conflict between America and the Viet Cong. It was an inner conflict about whether it was the right thing to do to go fight overseas while black people at home were fighting a war for civil rights and equality.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves.
And it's really not a stretch to call this struggle of civil rights in America a war. The Vietnam War lasted from 1955 to 1975. In that 20 years, the predominantly black 16th Street Church of Birmingham, Alabama was bombed, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were killed, and hundreds of people were murdered, beaten, sprayed by firemen's hoses, and bitten by police dogs, all in the name of civil rights. Muhammad Ali was all over the news when in 1966 he refused to fight in Vietnam after being drafted into the military. And he said, "Shoot them for what? They never lynched me. They didn't put no dogs on me. They didn't rob me of my nationality, rape and kill my mother and father. How can I shoot them poor people? Just take me to jail."
Wow.
Before he died, Martin Luther King criticized the Vietnam conflict as just a race war where the US was using black soldiers as mercenaries to kill the Vietnamese. Even so, a large number of African Americans fought in Vietnam, and glimmers of integration were seen in examples such as Staff Sergeant Clyde Brown Jr. He was a black man who commanded white men, something that was previously unheard of. Through the experience of fighting alongside white men in Vietnam, some black soldiers could see hope for the future. Captain Clifford Alexander Jr. said to Time magazine in 1967 that we are fighting over here against the Viet Cong and at home against discrimination. Together, we can win in both places. So even though the official desegregation of the military happened in the 1940s, right, integration didn't really start happening until the Vietnam War, which means that in the Korean War, which was fought from 1950 to 1953, segregation in the military was still very much alive and well. And we actually had someone tell us about their personal experience with that. Do you remember, Brother Vic?
Yeah, I remember. We met him at the African American History Museum. Mm-hmm. The dude kind of inspired us to start the podcast, so we want to tell some of his stories, like right now.
Yeah, I remember we were looking at some of the magazine covers that addressed black people in different ways, like Negro, colored people, mm-hmm. and this guy kind of just came up next to us and was talking about how when he was a kid, everyone used to just be called colored, mm-hmm. right? and it was a different time. Now if you call a black person that, you're probably gonna get your head bitten off.
Yeah, it's funny. I know some older white people call me Afro-American sometimes. I've gotten that recently.
Even that seems like super antiquated.
I don't prefer it. It's not my preferred title.
Yeah, not your cup of tea.
No. But yeah, Rick, I want to hear some of his stories.
Well, I remember that when he was talking to us, he told us about the death of Emmett Till and how scared black people were after Emmett Till's death to even so much as offend a white person.
Emmett Till, 14, was kidnapped and killed allegedly for wolf whistling at the wife of accused Roy Bryant.
It's not just that they discover his body and that he's been killed. He has been brutally beaten. As a criminal defense attorney, when we look at crimes, we often try to put together a picture about what happened, and it takes a lot of hatred and a lot of rage to do the kind of violence that was done to Emmett Till.
Or talk too loudly in their presence, or
especially down south, man.
Especially down south, or look at a white person the wrong way because they didn't want to end up the same way that Emmett Till ended up.
Yeah.
He was actually a veteran too, and he told us about his experiences fighting in the Korean War.
Yeah.
He told us that after joining the military, when he was in training camp in America, he tried to go to different restaurants to eat alongside his fellow white soldiers, and he wouldn't be allowed into the same restaurants, and even if he had his uniform on, the guy at the door would just show him a gun, like, you try to get in here and I'm going to kill you, even though you're a soldier for our country, which I thought was pretty baffling.
Yeah, and then the funniest part, or the more ironic part, was that he told us in the end that all the cooks were black.
Yeah.
So you're eating black made food, or food made by black people, and you won't allow a black person to dine at your establishment. Like, that's crazy.
And additionally, he told us about when he actually got to Korea and how some of the places, say like the bars that they visited, when the black men would enter the bar together, everybody else that was in the bar would just leave.
Yeah.
And what that led to, he told us, was they would protest. They would have protests, and eventually that led to more equal treatment, and people would stop leaving the bars whenever the black guys walked in. And so I thought that was a pretty cool kind of demonstration of how protesting can work.
Yeah, man, it's progress, all progress.
Yeah. But this guy, he had so many cool things to say to us, and the one thing that I regret was not getting his name.
Yeah, he would have been a great interview for the podcast.
He would have, and I remember we talked to him. We had a great conversation, and when we walked away, that's when I realized, like, oh snap, I didn't get this guy's name. Oh my gosh, I was so upset because I went to the museum hoping to get information, about black soldiers. I had this episode in mind. And so when I missed getting his name, I just started wandering around the museum hoping I would stumble across him again. Yeah. Vowing to get his name, and, some kind of contact information.
Yeah, man. That definitely would have been great. But at least we got some parts of the story, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and while I was, walking around looking for him, I actually stumbled across a display at the museum that showed some of the African American Medal of Honor recipients.
Okay.
Johnson and his comrades, after a surprise attack by 1 to 2 dozen German soldiers, Johnson was wounded alongside a comrade. But despite that, Johnson killed several of the German attackers with his rifle, and then after he ran out of ammo, he resorted to hand-to-hand combat using his knife.
Wow.
He killed more Germans after that and saved his fellow soldier from being taken prisoner. After that, when he heard more Germans in the area, he threw grenades until those Germans retreated.
Wow.
There was also Sergeant Cornelius H. Charlton, who served in the Korean War. His platoon commander was evacuated after being wounded while they were trying to attack and capture Hill 543. Sergeant Charlton, he rallied his men and led them on 3 separate assaults. During the first assault, he eliminated 2 enemy positions and killed 6. Though he was seriously wounded during the assaults, Charlton conducted a 4th assault alone and was wounded again by a grenade. Eventually, he silenced the enemy before he died himself.
man, it's impressive.
And so, you know, I saw these pictures of these two guys and many more like them who received the Congressional Medal of Honor for their valiant deeds.
Yeah, there were tons.
Yeah, there were tons. There's a whole lot of them, and the museum itself actually has a lot of information about, you know, the process of integration in the Army, and the stories of many Black soldiers who I think, you know, largely go unheralded and need the recognition that they deserve. Yeah. And so it was really cool to see that. I do really wish, though, that we had gotten that one guy's name. But in the spirit of hearing more stories like his, we actually went out and found some gentlemen who served in the military, and we were able to sit down and talk to them and get their insights and stories about their experiences.
Yeah, we conducted 2 really great interviews, and we're both excited for you guys to get to hear them and for the chance for those guys to share their stories.
Yeah. For our first interview, we talked to Jean-Claude Pierre, who is a Haitian American man, a retired accountant, and an Army veteran. He's also my uncle. So, like, the first one we'll say is, so what do you do right now? You know, are you retired? Are you working?
I'm retired right now. After I left military, I have a career in the bank. I just retired from banking.
Okay. That's nice to be able to be retired and and relax, right?
Yes, that sounds good.
When did you join the military? And if you don't mind us asking, you know, what was your reason for joining?
Okay, I joined the military in 1982. I went active, but I joined the military really in October 1981, something called Delay Entry Program. The Delay Entry Program, that's a program you get in, you sign in, you take physical, you do everything. What happened, you sign in, okay, they put you there because you don't go to basic training yet. They will hold on to, when they need you, they call you. And what advantage and reserve on Delay Entry Program, if you spend 6 months in Delay Entry Program, they count the time you're in the Army because you're really in the Army.
Right.
Because if there's a war, they're going to call you. They're going to call you. They're going to give you basic training very quick, and you're in. I spent 6 months in delay entry, and let me see, October, November, December, January, February. 4 months. I spent 4 months in delay entry. And then they called me in February 2nd. They called me, they want me in. The reason for just something I wanted to do, because when I was young in Haiti, I have a family member, and before Vietnam, during Vietnam, they were here, they come to Haiti at the uniform, they look good, things like that.
Right.
Hey, I have a relative, a distant relative who went to Haiti, and I see him in uniform. I was walking behind him, just happy to know him. And I said, if I go to United States, I'm going to join the military. And I did.
Yes.
When I came here, and I didn't join the military right away.
Okay.
I went to school and working. I was working in Wall Street, as a matter of fact. I was in Wall Street working, and one day I was reading a Newsweek and magazine, and while I was reading Newsweek, and there's a page in military. I said, wait a minute, that came back again to me. I said, wait a minute, that's my idea to come to the military. I look at, I look at the age they asked. I said, wow, I almost meet the age limit. And next day, I just get up and go to a recruiter. I was about 29, 30.
Okay.
30.
You had mentioned you were on Wall Street. So what was your actual position on Wall Street? What did you do?
I was working for a company, a steamship line, most likely a steamship line. It wasn't like in the stock market, nothing like that.
Okay.
Because a steamship line.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in the accounting department there.
Oh, the accounting department. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. I never knew that at all. I never knew that. So when you talked to the recruiter, you were able to sign up, and
the recruiter, and after I told my boss that, then I come back. I didn't want nobody to change my mind. As a matter of fact, I didn't tell my boss nothing. Even my wife didn't know. I didn't want nobody to my mind. And I took my physical, maybe within a week or 2 weeks, do my physical, swear. Then I start telling people. Now people can tell me anything. It's too late.
Yeah, and I understand why you would do that, because there's a good chance that someone would try to change your mind.
Oh,
yeah, of course.
My boss tried me. Come on, John. Military don't pay, thing like that. I said, no, it's not pay. That's something I wanted to do. Forget about the money. You're not going to get money, thing like that. My boss tried to change my mind. No, I tell him that's too late. That's too late. I already sign in and swear. I do my physical. That's too late.
You didn't just have your foot in the door. You had your whole body in the door. So.
Yeah. Nobody can change my mind anymore.
So you were in the Army, right?
I was in U.S. Army. That's correct.
Okay. And where did you go when you were called upon? Where did they send you?
Well, they sent me for basic training. I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I spent about 12 weeks there, I believe, 9 or 12 weeks. And I don't remember exactly, probably 9 weeks. And I went to basic training for Jackson, South Carolina. And after that, I went to AIT, Advanced Individual Training, and AIT in Maryland, Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Then my first duty station after AIT. AIT, that's what you Advanced Individual Training. That's where you learn a trade. Then they sent me to Fort Riley, Kansas.
Well, if you don't mind me asking real quick, what trade did you learn while you were at AIT?
AIT, I take a heavy wheel repair. I just fix most of the tank, track, all the truck you be there. I fix them. I fix tank and all track, heavy wheel repair. I do that. I fix tank and track and all the trucks, everything. I could have done anything else because I had the score to have a better job. But nothing was open. Nothing was open at that time. That was open for me. I wanted to go to language because I speak French and Spanish, and Haitian Creole is a language now. I had 3 you call that identifier in the military. I had 3 identifiers when and I could have go to language, but it wasn't open.
Oh wow! I didn't know that you speak Spanish too. That's very impressive. Yeah. So you learned how to fix trucks and tanks, and were you sent overseas at any point?
Oh yes, the same. Let me see, 2-3 months. I went overseas. We have an exercise in Germany called Reforger. We call Return Force in Germany, just like a NATO exercise. We had a training when I first come. And I had to go. When I first joined there, about 3 months later, I was in Germany for about 3 months in training. And after that, I come back to my unit, Kansas. And a year later, they sent me to Korea. I was in DMZ, in frontline in Korea.
Oh, you were in DMZ.
Yeah, I was in DMZ. I was very young. I was still a private. I was in DMZ. In Korea.
And what were you doing when you were there?
Oh, still my trade, fixed wheel and a front line, just like, you're in the front line of war. At the time, Korea was very hot.
Right.
And
what year was that?
Between 1994, between 1993, between 94, because I get in 1990, 2 year and a half, something like that.
Okay.
1994, I would say.
Okay. And did you?
1984. I'm sorry, I corrected. 1984.
84. Right. So yes, Korea was going through some conflict at the time, right?
At the time, Korea has a conflict at the time. President Reagan was president, and Reagan was president at that time. There was a conflict. And I wasn't scared. I wasn't scared because I came from a 1st Infantry Division. And Korea has 2 groups at that time. They had something called 7th Army. 7th Army is like a support. They don't want to support people on the front line. They're on the back. I remember I didn't have to ID because I was still a private. And when I was in Korea, and there's something called a replacement station where everybody stay until they send you to your unit. And every morning I see people crying. I ask, when they go on the list, they look at the name where they're going to go. If you're crying, one day I asked one of my leaders there, I say, why people crying? Oh, he said, because they don't want to go to the front line, thing like that, because DMZ is the front line. They would prefer to go to 7th Army. 7th Army is the back, the most like finance, hospital, thing like that, support. I said, oh, okay. And then I asked him how many people there. He told me the amount of people. I said, oh, I don't care. And again, for me, I know I wasn't going to 2nd Infantry Division, which is a front line, because I came from 1st Infantry. There's no way I would be in a support. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If I came from the 1st Infantry and Korea is 2nd Infantry Division in the front line, there's no way I didn't expect to go to support. You know what I mean? So when my name come down to go to the DMZ, I didn't care. I didn't have to cry, nothing like that.
You knew you were going to be sent to the front?
I knew I wasn't going to the front line.
Right. Of course, we know that you're a black man, you're a Haitian man, and you were serving in the military. And did you encounter any prejudice or any marginalization from being a black man? Any racism?
No, I would say no. I mean, with the capital N.
Capital N, okay.
No, the capital. I don't say it wasn't there, but I did not. If I say that, it's bad because I have helped the whole time I was military. I have people helping me, and a lot of white people helping me to put me. Within 2 years, I was a sergeant. That happened only in a wartime. I was in Korea when I became a sergeant, right?
Right.
And I was as a private.
So that was pretty fast.
Your job right, only they tell you that happened only in wartime. Because I had a chief. He was white. I couldn't say my generation. And every unit I've been, and I've just, I don't say it's not there. And also, it's hard to find it. I don't know about other branch in the Army Force, but U.S. Army, we have a equal opportunity. We have a lot of things they put there because they prevent things could happen. If you have any complaint, you don't even have to see your commander, your first sergeant. You can go straight to the headquarters and complain about it. And I was an equal opportunity NCO. NCO means non-commissioned officer.
I see.
I was a non-commissioned officer. If everybody give a complaint to me, if I see the complaint is legitimate and I can just go straight, I just have to announce my commander. I'm going to go see the headquarters for a reason. I tell him why I'm going to go. He's not going to tell me no. I don't know about other branch, but U.S. Army, we do have things in place. If you have problem, anything, you have problem, you have place to complain. You don't have to see your commander. You don't have to see your first sergeant. Only see your squad leader. If it's your squad leader, and your squad leader will take care of it.
Right. Well, that actually makes sense because there's one thing that I read while I was doing my research, and that was that the Army was more progressive than, say, the Marines or the Navy or the Air Force. And that they provided more opportunities for black men before the other branches started allowing black men to serve. So that makes sense.
Which is true, because now we have that in military. We have everything, even for drugs and alcohol, and we have people every unit. You have people there, and I was also a drug and alcohol counselor. I'm the one who just people is on drugs, and we are the one. We don't kick them out. We try to help you out and get kicked out.
There's one more thing that I'd like to ask, and it's if you have one last story of something that you learned, like a lesson learned, or if there's somebody who was an impactful person while you were in the military, or just any other kind of little story that you'd like to share as like one last thing for.
Yes. One thing I could say, I have a general I used to work for. We used to under the general he works in a headquarters. I mean, the general is not black. He works in a big office. He has about 10, 15, 20,000 soldiers under him. Mm-hmm. And that general, he knows most of his troops. I mean, mm-hmm. I remember I was in Germany, right? Mm-hmm. And the general always come. He always come to visit his troops, things like that. And the general always has his job to make sure the unit ready. He always check all his unit. Every time, once a month, he probably check this unit this month. Next month, he check somebody else. And one day, he come check us out. One day, he come and he called me, say, Sergeant Pierre, even my name wasn't there. Mm. Even my name was covered, and he remember me.
Wow.
About 3 or 4 months before, he come check my unit. And he said, Sergeant Pierre, did you fix this thing? I show him everything I have, and he come a second time to make sure everything wasn't right?
Yes.
To make sure everything done. 2-3 months later, he comes back to the unit, and he remember my name. Mm. This guy said, hey. And
that makes you feel good.
So many times while I was in Germany, mm-hmm. he comes so many times, and he still remember me. Mm-hmm. You don't see, most of the time, you don't see general do that. But this guy, at least once a month, he come run with his troops. Sometimes he can come with my company. He run PT in the morning, come at 5 o'clock in the morning, he run with us. And maybe next week, he go with another unit. I mean, he does that all the time. It's something like somebody like that, you're not afraid to go to war with him.
Yeah, you feel confident to fight next to a person like that.
That's an awesome leader.
He knows you, and you know him. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, that's the guy most impacting me.
Okay, mm-hmm. That's fantastic. So when you left the Army, was your rank sergeant, or it was something else?
I was staff sergeant.
Staff Sergeant Pierre, we thank you for your service.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time. We really appreciate it, man. Like, this is a great story, and we love to be able to share it with other people.
Yep.
Okay, no problem. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. Thanks again.
Be safe. God bless you.
Okay, you do the same. All right.
Take care.
Bless you.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Next, we talked to Clifford Williams, who's a friend of the family and an Air Force veteran. He had a lot to tell us about his days in the Air Force. Check it out.
So, to kick off our interview with Brother Clifford, we decided to ask him what he did for work.
I'm retired from the state of New Jersey. Worked at Rowan University. The Lord bless. I was the, I guess you would say the first black supervisor with the maintenance department and being over the electricians.
Next up, we asked Brother Clifford why he joined the military.
My reasoning was I got a letter telling me that I was eligible for being drafted, and I really felt that I didn't want to be drafted because if I get drafted, they're going to put me in the Army. Growing up in Washington, D.C., it so happened that my high school time, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, we had ROTC. My 11th and 12th grade, I was first lieutenant with the ROTC system, and I knew about Army, and I said I didn't want to be a ground pounder. I'd rather be in the air dropping the bombs instead of being on the ground trying to catch them. So I went and took the test, and I qualified that I went into the Air Force. And my going in was in March of 1962, and I was in until May of 1966. I was in 4 years, 2 months, too long. And it was funny. I say funny because, as I said, I lived in Washington, D.C., and I was told, as I understood, I was going for a physical
which I went over to Fort Hollowbird in Baltimore. And having gone there, they gave us the test again just to see if the recruiter hadn't kind of fudged some of our answers in order to get in. And so I took the test again, and then I had the physical. Then they took us in a room and had us to raise our hand. And there they told us we were now in the service. And being young as I was, I thought I was just going for a physical. And here it was, they were shipping me out to Texas, San Antonio, Texas, the gateway to the Air Force. And I tell you, I cried. I looked out over the sky, looked over Washington and said bye to all my family, because that's the first time I ever flew. From there, after 8 weeks of basic training, I went to Shepherd Air Force Base. And anyway, that was for my tech school training. And what my training was, producing electrical power. I really wanted aircraft mechanics, because I figured that there's always going to be airplanes. And so if I can get in with that, I can get me a job at the Washington National Airport, and I'll be set for life. But they put me in producing electrical power. And so this is going to be something that's going to take care of me for the rest of my life. So it's best for me to learn about it, and I tell young people that don't know what they want to do. If you don't know what you want to do, you don't have no goal, join the service.
Next up, we ask Brother Clifford to tell us more about his military job.
Well, what it entailed was producing the electric power. We had generators and switch gears and things to where we took care of the bases. Where when I went to Alaska, I was down at one of the places of Shemia, and I was transferred there temporarily because they needed a generator man. And I went there and I took care of the base there. I almost caused the base to lose electric, but the Lord blessed it that we didn't get that far. And that entailed, when I got out, that I could be an electrician. And that's how the Lord blessed. Because everybody, I find people are very afraid of electric, but even in '66, when I was getting out, they offered me $25,000 for a re-enlistment bonus. And I wanted to take it, but I had just got married. And I said, why should I give my wife $25,000 for another brother and her to have a good time while I'm being killed in the service? So I didn't take it, and I left. And I shouldn't say that was the only thing, because the Lord blessed. In 2 years' time, I became E4. And my next step was an E5, a staff sergeant. And they wouldn't give me my staff sergeant promotion because my time was going to be in May. In March, in February, the promotions come out. But I had joined in March. So they said I was not qualified or able to get that because I wasn't over 4 years service. And I said, well, I'm getting out in May. What's the difference? I'm the only one there qualified for this E5. And they said, no, that's why I couldn't get it. But it so happened they gave my E5 stripe to an air policeman who was 6 months under 4 years. But they said he had re-enlisted, and that's why they gave it to him. But it came down for my career field, but they gave it to someone in another career field. I found the Lord when I was stationed in Alaska for 2 years. And I found the Lord and became a Seventh-day Adventist. One of the things I didn't know, and I laugh about it now, because I didn't know what a conscientious objector was. And when I joined, they put all these papers out in front of me, and I read everything. So I read my paper, and it says, I'm not a conscientious objector. So I asked the personnel department, I said, what is a conscientious objector? He said, that means that you won't bear arms, you won't carry a gun. I said, or shoot a gun. I said, hey, I have no problem with shooting a gun. I was a rifleman. I was a marksman with high school. And all of this was on because I went to all-white vocational school when I was in high school in Washington. And I don't mean to backtrack here, but at that time in the 50s, there was two vocational schools. There was Phelps, which was like black, and Bell, which was like white. But I lived close to Bell. And so they said we had to take a test to see if we were mechanically inclined to come there. It so happened out of 16 of us who took the test, I was one of 4 that passed the test. And out of the 4 of us, I was only one of 2 to graduate. When I went into, my first day there in school, in my English class, Mr. Bond Savage, he told me, I'll just say it this way. He told me, he said, look here, N-word, I didn't ask you to come here. I don't care if you're being here. He said, as far as I'm concerned, you have failed. And he did. He failed me my 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. But the Holy Spirit at that time told me, go to night school. There's a school in Washington called the Cardoza High School. And that was between my Bell school and my home. So I took in the evenings classes. I took up English, literature, public speaking, anything and everything dealt with English. So it brought my grade down that in the end I was able to graduate. And so I believe all that was a part that helped me in my being able to be in the service.
At this point, Brother Clifford told us about prejudice and different things he had to face while being in the military.
Well, to show you the prejudice that I was faced with, after I finished my tech school training, my first place of my being in the service was Maine, Thompson Air Force Station. And that was near, it seems like, I'm trying to think, there's a college up there. This was a college, let's say it's in Thompson, Maine. And it so happened we had a situation where the inspector general had came because there were 6 black brothers who were homosexual and 1 white brother. And so they were kicking them out. So anyway, I come into work one night because this inspector general had found these guys and someone had scratched on the operators. This way, there's the generator operator section, and then there's the switchgear operator. But I was having to work the generators for that night, and someone scratched on the desk. Sure, it's a good thing that those 7 black are being kicked out. And I looked at that, and we had a civilian that worked with us on our shifts. So I went in. And I bust my fist down on his desk. I said, look, if you don't want me in this service because of my color, let me go. He said, Williams, what are you talking about? I said, I don't appreciate this, that someone did. He said, show me what you're talking about. So I go in and we look at it. He said, don't touch it. Just leave it alone. He goes back in and call the sergeant. And the sergeant, he called the captain, and the captain told the sergeant to go down and see about it. So the sergeant came in, he looked at it, and he said, okay, don't touch that desk. We're going to have it fingerprinted. And I said, well, you're going to find everybody's fingerprint. He said, but we know. So before I got off at 7 o'clock, the captain comes in and he says, Williams, I understand you're not happy with this. He said, I'm not happy with it neither. He said, but before the day is over, could you come? I'd like to talk with you about this matter. I said, no problem, sir. So I said, how about after lunch? He said, that'd be fine. So I go up and I make my report. He said, no, you don't have to do this. Come on in. I was almost like, we buddies and all. He said, what do you think about this? I said, I think that is wrong and I don't appreciate it. He said, so what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to write my dad. He said, oh, before you write your dad, let me take care of it. Give me 2 weeks and I'll get it taken care of. I said, okay, I appreciate that, sir. Oh, yeah. In 2 weeks, he got it taken care of. I got orders to be shipped to Alaska. When I was in, and even though I was stationed in Maine, there's a period where they open up to the servicemen the opportunity to go to the Air Force Academy. So I filled out all the paperwork for it. And I turned it in and I checked with him later on. And one of the black brothers told me, he said, man, they deep six your papers. They ain't going to let you go there. And I said, what? He said, yeah, you put the paperwork in and they threw it in the trash. I said, okay, so that was one of the prejudice. And then when I got to Alaska, I was stationed in Montana. And the opportunity came up for nuclear power. And I said, that sounds good because that's going to be something of the future, even though I was in the regular operation with generators, diesel engines and all. And so I said, hey, I like that. The only thing of it was I would have to sign up for 6 more years because I would have 4 years of college to go through, and they wanted 2 more years for them to get their money back and my being able to serve. And I said, this way I'll be an officer. I come out as a first lieutenant, and I'll be stationed to be over this type of operation. And they deep six my papers again. I like that idea because, they would ever do that to the brothers, But as I said, I filled out all the paperwork because I felt this was going to be a thing of the future with nuclear power. And so, as I said, that was happening. Well, see, I found that the Air Force, with its prejudice, if you did not meet up to their standard, they made you one of 2 careers to go to. One was air policeman, and the other one was a cook. And so that's how they put us. But I said, well, no problem. I guess as a cook, you got to know. And when I went to places, I would, check the food. I would talk with the cook, find out what they good. And so I told one that I was a vegetarian. I didn't eat meat, especially eating the pork. And so one of them, he brought me out a nice little dish of string beans. He said, I took the pork out. And I said, oh, man, I thank you so much for that. It's just a matter that even if it's cooked with it, I can't eat it. He said, what? So he made me a special side dish. And so, as I said, I was thankful for that. And it was all that part of, as the brothers, we took care of each other. We tried to watch out.
We appreciate you, Mr. Williams, and you, Mr. Pierre, for sharing your time and your stories with us. Thank you both for your service. And thank you to our listeners for bearing with us for this episode. We recorded it during Black History Month, so we're really happy to have been able to explore these stories and share them with you guys. Before we head out, we just want to let you guys know about a new segment for the podcast that we want to do for upcoming episodes. It's called What's the Chat? So basically, it's an opportunity for us to learn more about you guys and hear from y'all. All you have to do is make a voice recording on your phone or whatever other device that you have about something that's been on your mind, an observation that you've made about society at large, or maybe just something about yourself so we can get to know you guys better. And you can send that voice recording to blackliveschat@gmail.com. That's blackliveschat@gmail.com. Send it there, and there's a good chance that your clip will be included in the What's the Chat segment of upcoming episodes. So thank you guys, and until next time, BLC out. Black people throughout our history have fought in American wars for generations. No.
Just go. Start over.
All right. Black people throughout our history have fought in American wars.
Should keep that? No, we're not gonna keep it. Yeah. We should have like a
blooper reel.
Yeah.
All right. Black people throughout our history have fought in America.
Oh wait, you don't need to do the whole thing. Just say, just give a second and say I'm Rick. And
okay.
Yeah, we don't need to do all that.
I'm Rick.
I'm Vic.
And you're listening to Black Lives Chatter.
There you go.
All right, cool. Sorry, this is a lot in there.
No, man, you've been talking for like an hour. That's why I was like, you sure you want to keep going?
Yeah, I'm sorry.